Hey team, Mike here at After 40 Fitness and after40fitness.ca. One of my guys in my boot camp this week, Travis, said to me, why did you pick keto? First of all, I had to explain the difference between keto and Atkins and low carb and the little nuances between those. But he said, why did you pick keto? And it got me thinking, I should do a video on that. What a great question. Why did I pick keto? Why did you, if I stopped for a second and said to you, why did you pick keto? Do you have a good reason? Because I'm going to tell you something. I'm going to show you some science right now. It's going to blow you away. When it comes to weight loss, if weight loss is your goal, then there is no difference between keto and any other diet regimen. You're going to enjoy this science. This will be an eye-opener for you if you think that. However, to me, the reasons go well beyond just weight loss. Okay, it's more of a health-centric approach than just weight loss. To me, weight loss is a bonus. It's a side effect. If this is your first time to my channel, or you haven't yet, please do subscribe. Putting out a couple of videos a week now in this low-carb Atkins keto space. And you'll know by the title if it's of interest to you, but please do go ahead and hit the subscribe button, hit the bell icon, and select all for notifications, and that way you'll know when I get a little brainchild and decide to do a video. And definitely, if you enjoy this kind of content, do smash that like button for me. That helps me. On top of that, listen, I'm going to make one other comment. I'm not a doctor. I am a boot camp coach. I am a certified keto coach, so I have a certification in that regard as well. But when it comes to the information I give, you got to treat it like educational opinion at best, right? Entertainment value is how I like to describe it. Do with it what you will, but if you disagree with anything that I say, you damn well better take it up with your GP. Have you heard the name Layne Norton, Dr. Layne Norton? Layne is a PhD in nutritional sciences. Really intelligent guy. In fact, he's used to be a competitive bodybuilder. On top of being a PhD, a doctor in nutritional sciences. Look at that. There's a picture of him competing. So I like to see what he always has to say on scientific topics. He likes to break apart and tease apart topics, look at the science, debug myths. And so let's see what he has to say about the comparison between low-fat versus low-carb diets and which is superior for fat loss.
If we look at the scientific literature, there are numerous studies thus far that have looked at very low-carb diets versus higher carb diets with calories and protein equated. In every single one of those studies, which are highly controlled in terms of either food is provided or they're in a metabolic ward, you do not see a fat loss advantage for the low-carb diets.
No kidding. All right. So he believes that no study. Well, something. Let's go looking at a few. Let's break down a couple of studies really quickly, you and I, again with a bit of a contrarian mentality, and see what we come across. The first study we'll look at here is in the New England Journal of Medicine. The title is Comparison of Weight Loss Diets with Different Compositions of Fat, Protein, and Carbs. Oh, so good. They took 811 people, 811 overweight adults. What a great cohort. I mean, that's not a small study. And put them into 4 diet groups. Okay, so with protein being either low or high, either 15% or 25%, they either put them into low carb or low fat. All right, let's look at the results. Notice after 6 months, participants assigned to each diet had lost an average of 6 kilograms. It says they did begin to regain weight after 12 months. However, by 2 years, weight loss remained similar in those who were assigned to a diet of 15 versus 25% protein. So our first takeaway is, does protein impact your weight loss? Not according to this. 15 versus 25%. So people who say that 25 or 30% is too much protein, whatever. In those assigned to a diet of 20% fat, versus those assigned to 40% fat, and those assigned to a diet of 65% carbs versus 35% carbs. Among the 80% who completed the trial, the average weight loss was 4 kilograms. Satiety, hunger, satisfaction with the diet, and attendance were similar for all groups. The diets improved lipid-related risk factors and fasting insulin levels. So good. Conclusions were that calorie-reduced diets result in clinically meaningful weight loss regardless of their macronutrients. So not only was weight loss virtually the same, in fact, the differences between the groups was considered inconsequential and insignificant, but there were benefits beyond weight loss in every group. Notice all the diets reduced risk factors for cardiovascular disease and diabetes, both at their check-in at 6 months and again at 2 years. Okay, so cardiovascular disease and diabetes, the numbers were dropped. All the diets, here's an interesting one talking about insulin. All the diets except the one with the highest carb content decreased fasting insulin levels anywhere between 6 and 12%. All right, so good to know, and that makes sense, right? If the calories are high, if the calories are 65% of the diet, you wouldn't be surprised that insulin stayed high. And yet, remember, that did not impact weight loss. having higher insulin levels. So cool, right? Isn't that neat to know? And notice the next line, the decrease was larger in the high protein diet than average protein. Think about that for a second. All right, just if you're one of those people who likes that use the term moderate protein in relation to your keto diet, then I want you to get that for a second, that there was a difference of 6%. The decrease in insulin was 10% versus 4% for the high protein group versus the low or the average protein group.
Hey, I got you guys a protein shake.
Awesome. I love protein.
I know you love protein. I love protein too.
Oh my goodness, so good. And blood pressure decreased from baseline with no significant differences. Again, no differences between the groups. So when it came to, we talked about diabetes, there was mentions of cardiovascular disease, and this one here, blood pressure, no difference between the groups. Okay, lastly, metabolic syndrome was present in a third of participants. So of the 800 participants in change, 809, a third had metabolic indications of metabolic syndrome, and that had dropped the percentage at year 2, ranged between 19 and 22%, depending on the 4 groups. So I think this is study number 1 in favor of there is no difference between the diet modalities when it comes to weight loss, not to mention some of these other risk factors. The second study we'll look at is in PLOS1. Notice this title, Low Carbohydrate versus Isoenergetic Balanced. So I'll just stop really quickly. Low carb means low carb and then modified fast to make up the calories. Isocaloric means equal amounts, right? So same amount of calories going into carbs as going to fat. What they call a balanced diet. For reducing weight and cardiovascular risk, this is a review and a meta-analysis. The objective is to compare the effects of low carb versus balanced weight loss diets in overweight. I love it. I'm so glad they used overweight and obese adults and made sure the studies fit that group so we would see the best possible impact of either diet. Some popular diet weight loss regimens like Atkins, like keto, like low carb claim to be more effective and have additional health benefits in preventing cardiovascular disease compared to balance. So I'm really more interested right now for the sake of this discussion with the weight loss, but they are going to look at other health benefits. So that's key part because we're going to talk about why you and I should be in a low carb keto Atkins regimen, and it has nothing to do with weight loss, as you'll see shortly. It's going to be the other health benefits. Our analysis showed little or no difference in mean weight loss in the 2 groups at anywhere between 3 and 6 months, and then out to 1 to 2 years. So depending on the studies, in fact, what they did was they had all these studies, the different trials. I think there was 14 that were out to 1 year, another dozen that were beyond that, out to 2 years. Discussion. So including these 19 studies and a total of 3,200 participants, there was probably little or no difference in changes in weight and cardiovascular and diabetes risk factors with low carb diets compared to balanced weight loss diets. And this was in both, notice, overweight and obese with or without diabetes, right out to 2 years. Little or no difference in changes in weight, but in cardiovascular and diabetes risk factors, even with higher carb. Okay, even with 50-50, I shouldn't say that because it's 50-50 after protein is taken out. So if protein was 20%, that leaves 80% of calories, and they were split equally in the isoenergetic balanced diet. So let's call it 40% carbs and 40% fat, roughly in that genre, and yet there was no difference compared to the low carb group. The third and last study was by far the most compelling, and I'm going to try to do it justice, so please bear with me for a couple of minutes. It happened at Stanford. It was reported on in JAMA, which is the Journal of the American Medical Association, but it was done by a team of researchers at Stanford. And the title was, the actual study was called the FIT study, but the title was One Diet Does Not Fit All, a Weight Loss Study. You'll notice the objective of the study was to determine whether a putative genotype pattern, low fat versus low carb, or insulin secretion, right? Someone's ability to be either insulin sensitive or insulin resistance would help explain which diet was best for whom, whether it was a healthy low fat or healthy low carb diet. And they did this over a full year. Before I get into the details of this study, which you're going to appreciate, it's really kind of cool. I got to tell you something they did. They figured out a genotype, or they looked at a bunch of genetic and epigenetic markers that they thought that would predict whether someone should be predisposed to a low carb or a low fat diet. But they figured out a genotype, and they thought, we're going to see if we can predict who will do better on what diet. So what I did is really quickly flip between some information from the study itself. I also found a researcher online who was willing to share some clips, who was at the study at Stanford, one of the researchers in this study. And let's get started with a little blurb about the number of people in the study and some things about them.
This required quite a few people. We ended up with 609 enrolling in the study, with more than 300 assigned to each diet. and all of them with this wide range of genetic predisposition potentially and insulin glucose regulation variability.
So there was more than 600 people. Awesome. What an amazing cohort. They were between the ages of 18 and 50, a BMI of anywhere from 28 to 40. And just for reference, 25 to 30 is overweight. So they were all at a minimum overweight, but 30 plus being obese meant a large percentage were obese. They had to be otherwise healthy, though. They couldn't be on any meds, any statins. They couldn't be on even drugs for type 2 diabetes. So if they had any indication of prediabetes, they had to be drug-free. And then they were randomly assigned, even though they were genotyped, even though they were already thought to have a predisposition to one diet or another, they were then randomly, with the luck of the draw, assigned to either this healthy low-fat diet or a healthy low-carb diet. They were followed for a full year. Now, when I say a healthy low-fat or a healthy low-carb diet, some interesting things. They were all admonished to avoid white sugar, white flour, trans fat intakes, and to focus as much as possible on whole foods.
And we told both groups, low-fat and low-carb, as little or no added sugar if possible, as little or no refined grain if possible, and as many vegetables as you can.
So remember, the participants were genotyped, right? So they had these genes that the researchers at Stanford thought would predispose people to either doing well on a low carb or on a low fat diet with respect to weight loss and or weight gain. About 40% of the participants had what appeared to be the low fat genotype. In other words, they expected the low fat, higher carb diet to do them well. 30% had the low carb genotype, which meant about 30% crossed over into both. There was not meaningful differences in the amount of weight loss. Notice this, at 12 months, the low carb group had lost on average 13 pounds compared to 11.5 in the low fat group. All right, so the difference over the course of 12 months was about 1.5 pounds. The difference was not statistically significant. No, it really isn't. Okay, if they're isocaloric, they're in the same deficit but eating the same amount of calories, and yet the difference over the course of an entire year is 1.5 pounds. That's individuality, that's quirks. However, that's not the real result from the study. I think you'll find this whole topic about genotyping really interesting, because notice what the researcher from Stanford says next about the results.
One of them was that people would lose a lot of weight in a weight loss study, and they did. They lost collectively 6,500 pounds. The other thing that had to happen was that we needed people to have a wide variability of weight change on both diets. Some of the participants lost 40, 50, 60 pounds. Some gained 10 to 20, and everything in between.
I hope you caught that. With the exact same diet regimen, with the exact same caloric deficit, some people lost as much as 60 pounds on the low-fat or the low-carb diet, while others in their exact same group put on 10, 15, 20 pounds. Directly from the study itself, there was no average difference in weight loss between the two diet groups, which we discussed, between the healthy low-fat and the healthy low-carb, right around 12, 13 pounds respectively over the course of a year. Notice the range of weight change within, just as he said, between both diet groups was dramatic, from losing 60 pounds to gaining 20. So this then turns around and said that it's impossible, right? It's impossible to predict which diet program, until you try it, is going to serve you better.
There was a low-fat genotype, there was a low-carb genotype. High percentages of people fell into both categories, not predictive at all of who was more or less successful on either diet. And no matter what their insulin glucose dynamics were in our hands, there's no ability to predict if one diet was better than another. So we closed the doors on our original two hypotheses, but the future is full of opportunity for building on this study.
There was one good takeaway, though. Do you remember what the recommendation was about how to eat? Let's see his last final comment on this topic.
Get rid of added sugar, get rid of refined grain, and eat as many vegetables as you can.
So if it's true, then, if we've proven to your satisfaction via these 3 studies, especially this Stanford one, wasn't that remarkable? Oh, so compelling, that there really is no difference in weight loss between a low-carb and a low-fat diet. So then the question comes back to, why are you and I Ketonians? Why are we low-carbers or Atkins practitioners? And for me, it came down to 4 reasons. I can give you the 4 reasons why I follow this menu when clearly you really don't need to. That the Zone, the Weight Watchers, the Noom plans are all very effective, as proven. Number 1, for me, it is the reduction in insulin levels. Okay, if you do studies on the research, if you look up the impact of chronically high or pathologically high insulin, it does lend itself to all the other diseases that we see, all the other chronic diseases, dementia and Alzheimer's being two that I do not want to get. No matter what happens in my life, I want to avoid those two. But when it comes to cardiovascular, cardiopulmonary cancers, oh my goodness, the list goes on and on. There really isn't a disease that isn't exacerbated by high pathological and chronically high insulin levels. So to me, it was important that whatever menu plan I go on keeps my insulin as low as possible. The only one that does that is the low-carb diet. Number 2 is hunger. I don't like being hungry. And if you like me have done low-fat, higher-carb diets in the past where you do get those fluctuations in glucose and insulin, you know what I mean? You're hungry, and you're hungry a lot. I didn't want that. I wanted, and now that I've done some more research on it, I understand the impact of insulin on leptin and ghrelin, right? Our satiety and our hunger hormones. I now understand why in a low-carb diet, I can fast. I can go the day without hunger pains. I can go 24 hours without food when I do that on Mondays, and I take the day off from food. No wonder I can do it. I could never do it on a low-fat diet. Number 3 was the ability, and I just mentioned it, the ability to add intermittent fasting. And again, it comes back to any of you that have tried fasting on a low-fat diet. Oh, that is just brutal. I wouldn't want to wish that on anybody because I hated myself when I was trying to combine fasting with a low-fat diet. So low-carb makes that so much easier, as we talked about. I love the ability to tie the two together. I do believe they're very separate regimens. So I've got some videos and I'll post some links down below to intermittent fasting, the pros and the cons, some of the side effects, but the benefits of it. Isn't it amazing, though, that intermittent fasting is such a regimen in and of itself, as is Keto and Atkins, or a regimen in and of themselves. But when you put the two together, I truly believe magic happens. Number 4 is a food addiction. Okay, so if you're like me, I always say to people who ask about what happens on my refeed days, and I really have to plan them strict. I have to be very careful with them because I'm one of those people, and maybe you're like this, that it's like I flip a switch. If I reach over and I accidentally grab a handful of M&Ms when my kids are having that at the show, or licorice, or something to that effect, a pop or popcorn, once I open the door, if you will, and I have something sweet, something sugary in my mouth, I write off the day. The day to me is toast. It's gone. I'll start again tomorrow morning. And that to me, I call that my dark passenger, if you're a Dexter fan, but that really is a food addiction. And that is, it's the same thing if I was an alcoholic, and I can be good and I can chip away at day after day without having any alcohol. But as soon as I have some, if you know an alcoholic, this is a shame to compare to, but they're the same. It's very difficult for an alcoholic once he begins to have, or she had to have a drink, to stop. And I'm like that with carbs. So those are the 4 reasons why I'm Atkins /keto /low carb, despite the fact I know I don't need to get shredded. I am going to touch on one more, just as an afterthought. Call it a bonus one, or maybe number 5, if you will. And that is metabolic flexibility. And the reason I bring that one up is because there has been some studies that have pointed out that when we're low carb and we up our omega-3s in particular, we do get a metabolic burst. We get a bump in total daily expenditure. In fact, I just read a study, and I'll put a link down to it below, where it showed that low carbers, compared to people who are on a low fat regimen, can burn between 131 and 278 more calories per day than the high carb group. Okay, so low carb managed to burn more calories per day, and they attributed that to a higher amount of omega-3s. So do some research on omega-3s. In fact, do a Google search if you're curious about omega-3 omega-3s boosting metabolism, and you'll see what I mean. Plenty of studies show that it appears to be a higher fat content, lower carb, tends to keep our metabolism burning faster, burning hotter for a longer period of time in a caloric deficit than the opposite, than a high carb, low fat diet does. So having said all that, I hope you enjoyed that content. I hope those are a couple of nuggets you can take away and apply. And if you're like me and you're a low carber, not so much for weight loss reasons, but for the other health benefits that come from it. Hey, if I missed any, by the way, do put a comment down below. I shared a 4 and a 5th bonus one on metabolic flexibility. If I missed any really good reasons why you think I should share a video on why you and I are low carber, Atkins, or keto practitioners, and I haven't covered it outside of weight loss, please do share that down below. But on that note, thank you so much for spending your time with me. Again, I hope you got some good information. If you did, please do hit the like button. Smash that like button and help me grow the channel. And if you have the opportunity to share this and you feel like doing so, sharing this video to a friend or in social media, please do. I appreciate it. On that note, I'll see you in the next one.